Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast where we make sense of agricultural policy. I'm Jenny Ifft, and I teach agricultural policy at Kansas State University.
I'm Trey Malone. I'm the Bulgy Chair of Managerial Economics at Purdue University. And we are here with Jenny Ifft, who needs no introduction to the podcast crowd that is listening to this on your side. But even though you don't need an introduction, I would love to hear it. So let's hear your hot take of who you are and what you do.
Originally from Central Illinois, farm background. It's very, very classic Corn Belt, corn and beans, not too big. We did grow a little bit as I grew up. I was born in 1980, so the first 15 years of my life, it's lean times, I'd say. My parents always wanted me to go to college. Neither of my parents finished high school. They got their GED. And so that was classic American dream, right? You go to college. Farming was really, really tough back then. And I think I always say that's the one time that I listened to my parents. I just never stopped going to college.
Yeah. Did you go to Illinois for your undergrad?
I went to Illinois for undergrad. I had a advisor who was like, you get good grades. Maybe you could get an international scholarship. And I said, well, gee, let me try that. And I was doing some study abroad and other stuff. I had some cousins that had worked internationally, so they kind of inspired me. So, I had a couple people that said, hey, why don't you try this thing? And I ended up getting a scholarship to Cambridge. I did that for 1 year. That was an awesome experience.
Now, for the audience, where is Cambridge?
Cambridge, England. Yeah.
England.
So one of the world's oldest universities, very international, completely out of my depth. But, it was a great community. I did that for a year. I wanted to go into international agricultural development. So I worked for the World Bank for 2 years. Somehow I got into Berkeley to do my PhD. That was an awesome experience. Still thought I was going to do international development. But at that time, development was more, say, education, labor, and my interests were in agriculture. And for various reasons, I ended up working for the Economic Research Service, and I had already had some interest in that area after I graduated, so really started focusing on finance. It was very natural for me. I had great mentorship there. I worked on the farm income forecast, started thinking about crop insurance and access to credit because of a question the chief economist asked me. So that's how my interest in finance, I really sort of got the depth. And having that foundation of here's the U.S. farm sector, here's how much money is in it, here's how many farms are in each specialization, and getting that stuff stuck in your head, that was an amazing way to start my career.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that is it's the juxtaposition of going from rural Illinois with a couple parents that didn't graduate high school to then going to this when I think about Cambridge, I think it's super fancy, and I don't know, maybe it's not that fancy, but
some ways not.
At some level, did you feel like a fish out of water? Because in Illinois, did you get an ag econ degree? Was your undergrad?
I did. I was in the ag econ department. I like research. I like answering big picture questions. I like what we do, and I like working in agriculture, and I think that's the key thing.
But what's the through line? What's the thing that you're this has been yes, I wanted to do international development. Do you feel you're 100% different from what you originally thought you wanted to do, or is there something connected all the way through?
Well, yeah, I think it is sort of that linked to my roots, wanting to work in agriculture. When I started my undergrad, I wanted to be a farm accountant. So yeah, and now I'm doing research in that area. So I think there is a lot of through lines.
You've got a very unique background because not many people go to that world of Berkeley and then come back.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight or feel for what makes ag different, or what makes agribusiness or rural business different? What is it when you think about what you're explaining to people in Cambridge, why what they're talking about does or doesn't translate to where you're from? What are you telling them?
I want to answer that in a little bit a different way, because I've kind of just everywhere I've gone, I've kind of absorbed it. The way Michael Pollan was popular, when I'd started my PhD, and the way that that some of that in those institutions that people talked about farming, people from farming are conservative, or the implication is a little backwards. They don't quite say it that way. But yeah, there's it was always weird to me. It was always felt funny, and I didn't always know know why, and I'd share, here's my background, here's our struggles. But there's sort of like agriculture is, it's run by big business, it's exploitative to the environment, it's exploitative to workers. There's just like these stories people tell, and if you tell a story that fits within that, then people just believe you. I see it happen in research sometimes, or like not quite that bad, but if you ask a question along those lines, no one, like, it's not questioned. So that's something I experienced, and I think not absorbed it, but then I'm back in Kansas where it's like that's not. No, I never like absorbed it or believed it, but then like now I'm back here and the reality is so different, and I can see how it like isn't different from what I grew up with, and it I think it provides a lot of perspective
Yeah, I mean, I
on
think
what's happening right now.
that's the hard challenge to me. Like I didn't go across an ocean, but I grew up in like rural Kansas, and like I was kind of done with rural America. And so I actually went to the biggest city I could imagine to live in, which was Kansas City, which is not very big. I understand. But to me,
Yeah,
from where I was from, it
absolutely.
was like, oh my gosh, like Trey went to Kansas City. And like I think about that a lot because like the difference in perspectives that I gained from living in a city where I grew up, if you heard sirens, you went outside to see what was going on. You hear sirens in inner city Kansas City, you go inside and lock the door. Like it's not the same thing. But I also learned that it's actually a wonderful place to live. As I think everybody in our world, there was a moment in time where I thought development economics was going to be my thing too, right? And then I look back and I thought, there are a lot of things going on in rural America that I could also work on that I also have experience in, which provides a little bit better context, I think, for doing some of this meaningful work.
Exactly. I can definitely relate to that.
Okay, so you are now the Barry Flinchbot Chair.
Yes.
Okay, so first off, tell me who this person was. I mean,
Right.
he's
Right.
legendary for most of the ag world, but
Taught agricultural policy for 49 years. He was trying to make it to 50 years. He was very charismatic, an amazing speaker, just gifted at storytelling. But it went beyond that. He was gifted at connecting to people. He connected to his students. From his first year teaching, he got one of his students to drive him around Kansas. I mean, and they loved it. Like,
yeah, that's cool.
these are some long drives.
Yeah, I
But I
know.
mean, he built up a great network. His students got placed in DC. I mean, he was like, great friends with Pat Roberts, Dan Glickman, Bob Dole. I met him once. It was really the first year I came here. I was the chair designee, so I wasn't the chair yet, but it was like, do
Yeah,
your job for 2 years and you get the chair.
I see.
And he was teaching, it was his 49th year teaching. It was right in COVID, and he was pretty frail at that point. So he's being careful. So we sat on his porch and talked for an hour and a half. He told me a story about how Bob Dole threw a book at him once. And other ones. I mean, he was just magnetic. And I keep meeting people. The first day I taught class, I went to the dentist, and my hygienist grandpa had taken class with him. Like, it happens all the time.
So he's iconic, but there's like one phrase that, like, when I think
Yeah.
of Barry Flinchbot, this is the
Yeah.
phrase that I think of. What phrase is that?
Yeah. You got big shoes to fill? No.
No,
Do you smoke a cigar?
no, no. Alternatives and consequences.
Compromise is, oh, yeah. Yep.
Alternatives and consequences. When I think about Barry Flinchbot, like that's
No,
the
that was
phrase
the thing.
that everybody likes to talk about.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
am I wrong? Like that seems like
No, and that's part of what the center is built upon.
Well, tell me about that.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I think it fits really well into the land grant model, or at least what we're supposed to do. That when you're a researcher, a policy advisor in the system, your job is not to tell people what to do. It's that you're supposed to lay out the consequences for different policy alternatives. And before I came to K-State, I never thought about that. But that is like something that I think we should all live by. And I think it's something that he talked about and embodied so much that like for me to get started in an outreach position at K-State, people were used to that. They were used to engaging an economist. They were used to us being constructive.
I mean, I think that there are a lot of different models for engagement for how to do ag econ.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I appreciate that one, especially in this policy arena, because
Right.
it's very easy for me to put on a math hat and be like,
Hmm.
this is what you should do.
Right, right.
But ultimately, like it's much more constructive and helpful, I think, to say here is a
Right.
suite of options, and there are
Yes.
consequences to each of these options.
And
And
it's not always like that. You don't always like lay it out exactly like that, but you're like, if you choose to use this type of crop insurance, if you implement this policy, here's what's going to happen. Like here's what's going to happen. This might be good. You might want to be worried about this. So I think that's how I end up doing it a lot in practice.
okay, so this is a good transition to this next part. I want to talk about
Yep.
kind of the current financial situation. And
Hmm.
for what I'm working on right now, I'm very interested in kind of the history of thought around this area. So, I'm not, I wouldn't consider myself like an ag finance person in the same way that you are. But I hear constantly people say, well, this kind of feels like the 90s farm crisis, right? So let's talk
Yeah.
about farm debt. Let's talk
Yep.
about,
Absolutely.
all of that.
Yep.
When people see numbers as we are sitting, like they're like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. Tell me what is and what is not like history, and what was history versus what it is now.
I mean, the farm sector is very different. I mean,
How? Tell me more.
yeah, it's sort of, you have larger farms. There's less small farms. I mean, the definition, broadly speaking, the definition is changing over time. But yeah, there's been a lot of consolidation. Lending practices have changed. Cultural lenders are more conservative. Lending tends to be more cash flow based. It's not asset based anymore. So, I mean, anyone will tell you like solvency is low. I think that's a little problematic if that's all you look at. Or if you say farmland values can't go down, that's a
I've heard that
that's a
before, though,
scary thing to hear.
right? I've heard them a lot of times at conferences.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of outside influences, so there are places, but this, it's a really different world. Ellen Featherstone, my things in ag finance. Ellen Featherstone has done it, by the way, or
Huh.
Peter Berry,
Yeah.
and there's a few other names in there. But he's looked at this, so the Arkansas data goes back to the 70s, and there's a debt repayment capacity was low for a relatively modest share of farms in the data set. But those numbers, the debt repayment capacity numbers, don't look too dissimilar to what they did then. So that would, for me, that's the sort of the starting point when you think about what's happening right now.
Okay, so debt repayment capacity, is that like an
Yes.
indicator you're paying attention to, or what indicators are you like, this is, I know you guys are like developing even indicator like dashboards.
Yeah, you have to look at
What are you paying
everything.
attention to?
I mean, hopefully, like, liquidity is like what I would say is like the true early warning.
Tell
But,
me what that means.
we're looking at bank data, we're looking at sentiment, we're looking at regulatory reports, farmland markets. So you kind of have to take the whole thing. I mean, for me, the farm income, that's farm sector income. It's an important, metric that we track over time, but the sector level right now, you really have to break it down. What I think is useful is the farm level data that's coming out of USDA and other sources.
Let's
Yeah.
shift just briefly to farm income. How much of farm income is just determined by farm policy now, right? Like what share,
Oh
and
Lord.
is
Yeah.
federal spending like an actually good measure of farm health?
That's
Is that a loaded
the
question?
problem. That's the question. It's, oh gosh, I don't have I mean, it's not unusual in Kansas for it to be 30 or 40% of farm income, including recently, and that's for all farm income. It can be higher for crop farms, and it is today. So, I mean, it depends does it mean that loans are going to get repaid? Yes. So
Yeah, sure.
it's a short-term measure of stability. In the long term, I'm not so sure.
Yeah. Okay, but let's talk about long term. So
Yeah.
does this look that different? Like, does farm policy now look that different from what it did in the 80s?
Well, I mean, in the 80s, we had a system of supply management and price support. So, it was, and I think we probably did undergrad around the same time. It was like, this is bad from an economist perspective, right? It's like, and you could see it, like, you had the price supports through the loan program, and then you're trying to manage supply on the other hand. And it was a treadmill. You could get out. Occasionally there'd be a war or drought, and then you'd have some relief, and then you'd end up with the same problems. The government was storing grain. trying to get the price supports right. It's
A lot of
it's
central planning, right? Like
it was
it's a lot of
it's
math that people are
I mean
doing to try to sort out a
I
commodity
wouldn't want to
market.
be the person at the USDA trying to figure that out.
It was
And they
bananas.
knew it
Yeah.
from the beginning. Like, it wasn't like people were like surprised. And it just, that politically it took 6 decades to unravel. And I would say from about 2000 to 18 was a period of policy stability on the crop side. Crop insurance was growing, you had ups and downs in prices, but it was mostly it was, the crop insurance program and Title I. So there was predictability. And, you could argue about the right level of support, but
Can you
there was
briefly explain the
predictability.
titles of the Farm Bill? You mentioned Title I. Walk me through those.
Title I is the farm safety net. I think crop insurance is Title 11. There's I can't remember all the
There's
titles.
a million of them, yeah,
I'm
right.
not storing, I refuse to store that in my brain. But
Yeah, right.
there's a conservation title. There's, the food and nutrition probably has a couple titles. So there's many titles, many parts of the Farm Bill.
Title I, when people think about farm
Safety
policy,
net.
that's the thing that usually is what they're
So you
really
say
going to use.
commodity programs,
Yeah.
standing disaster programs are there. The big part is our commodity programs today. That's ARC and PLC, agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage.
Yeah.
So those
yeah.
that's the one pillar. The other pillar is crop insurance. Increasingly, we have huge ad hoc payments that are almost becoming predictable. I saw people on social media saying you have to plant to be eligible. So so one thing, and I've been trying to ask this question to a couple different people who've been doing this for decades. Like, obviously some supply management, like there's known problems. If you want to do that, you have to be like Canada with their maple syrup and like have serious law enforcement actions and all that. It's hard to do. But I've been trying to get at the costs of that. Like not on, did somebody measure the cost of storage? Like, was there a measure of the cost of all this that we could compare to the cost we're spending today? So I think I don't have a particular, it's just the payments are so big now.
Yeah.
If you add up Title I, ad hoc, and crop insurance, and
The ad hoc is
in
what
a lot
blows
of cases,
my mind.
but are these is this like still better than what we were doing before?
I think it's harder.
I think is a relevant question.
Well, but so I think that it's harder from like a long-term planning perspective if I don't understand the ad hoc payments that I'm going to get, and these change
you could believe you're getting them. You could say they're, this government's going to come through. They always find a way. They love the farmers, but when are they going to come? And how much is it going to be? And then when do you buy your inputs? Do you buy that tractor or whatever you need? And so ad hoc needs to be ad hoc.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the hard part is ad hoc means that I can't take this to a lender.
Occasional, I think, is what I meant there.
Yeah. Right. But you're right.
Yeah.
Like it's a big challenge, I think, to really like navigate what is the number I always throw out is that this global policy uncertainty index usually hovers at about 100, the index that they do out of Chicago. This last year it hit 8,000. So we're in a place where like the policy uncertainty is so severe that I think there's this overarching challenge on farm to decide like, what do I do right now?
Yeah. And it matters for agribusinesses too. I mean, they have with your seed inventories, machinery, like I'm sure that payments matter. I don't know exactly how much, but that you have to plan for these things.
Well, I mean, and we have these nasty biological lags that you asked about when you buy your inputs. Well, I have to buy it by a certain day, but like, when do I buy it before then? I don't know. Right. Like,
yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So let's lean in a little bit. So ad hoc payments are not crop insurance. Right. And so you've done a ton of research on crop insurance, and can you talk me through a little bit like the history of crop insurance and how like the scaling up of crop insurance in our lifetime looks and what that.
Yeah. So, I mean, crop insurance was, from the 30s to early 90s small. And there's a whole, background to that. They temporarily made it mandatory in 95. So you had to get at least catastrophic protection. They increased the subsidies.
Know that. Huh.
You had to at least get catastrophic protection to be eligible for your like farm bill payments. And so that just, shot up participation. 96, I said, we don't like mandatory. We take that away. But it went down, but it didn't go back down all the way. So that just really pushed adoption. And then you had the Asian financial crisis, late 1990s. There were ad hoc payments. Some of them were reimbursements of the crop insurance premium. that got codified in ARPA. Not sure I passed my acronym quiz, but ARPA in like 2000 that created our modern crop insurance program. It made revenue protection viable. And, that 2000 to 2010 is when you kind of really saw the growth in crop insurance, where you're looking at 90% of planted acres for major crops. But the thing about crop insurance is that you can have private development of products. And so, and it's something that there's no there's a process, but you go through the process. It's a fairly transparent process. So now that, and through that and through RMA can create products. So expansion to specialty crops, livestock, pasture and forage. There's some rainfall index products to try to reach crops that are like forage. It's not so easy to insure. So it's opened the door to expand the safety net. And it's one of the ways that's less hard to do. So if you go through Congress or the executive branch, you tend to focusing on we call them program crops, the crops that were, in the traditional farm bills. And then we've added some over time, but traditional commodity crops, but you could do more with crop insurance. And so, whereas adding new programs because of the politics is really hard to do. So crop insurance is a way that you could expand the safety net. And so, and it's happening. They always do specialty crops that are being added, new pilots, greenhouse, Christmas trees, tree nuts. It's just, you could find a couple that, crops that still don't use it very much. Apples were huge. It's gotten really big. It's a lot of the extension work I do is livestock and forage insurance options, just to let that group know that historically hasn't done a lot of insurance. And now you have whole farm revenue protection, which is supposed to be for small and diversified farms.
But you hear a lot of complaints on the small and diversified.
Oh gosh. And I don't like picking on the RMA or the crop insurance folks about this, because it is open to expansion, but it still has to be insurance, and you need data for good insurance.
Yeah.
Even if you're subsidizing it a lot. And so it doesn't always address the key risks that they're facing. So yes, and whole farm revenue protection, they've changed that so much to try to make it easier to use. And I do think for some of these groups, if they could actually design a safety net program that fit their needs, this might not be it. It's just making the best of what we have.
Okay, so you've got a paper that talks about how crop insurance participation is tied to higher short-term debt use. So talk me through what that means about how farmers actually use this stuff.
Right.
What do you think? And then take it further. Tell me what this means for not just how farmers use it, but what that implication is for agribusinesses.
Right. Absolutely. So you could start at this from a farmer or lender perspective.
Yeah.
And sometimes the crop insurance decision from the farmer is tied to a line of credit. And sometimes it's hey, just give me, it's not something you're necessarily thinking about a lot. From the lender's perspective, though, and we have a paper on this, and I've had a lot of discussions, they said, well, before we could insure about 65% of expected revenue, because, farm lenders, they know what yields are. They can understand futures markets. They can understand federal programs, so that their job is to get repaid if they want to keep being a lender. And so you could peg an operating line to, whatever you expect revenues to look like, plus the federal programs. With crop insurance, you get an individualized farm level guarantee, and all of a sudden a lender says, okay, I can lend up to 75 to 80% of expected revenue now, because I know there's this revenue floor. I've heard that story a lot explicitly. It's not always explicit, and there's some farms that it's not going to be explicit because they don't need extra controls, but that's, and the data shows it as well. So that's, crop insurance is a key component of our ag production lending right now, I'd say.
Which is, it has all these ripple effects, right? I think about falls underneath certain products in the crop insurance space. What are the implications on machinery sales, everything else? All of this ties to this uncertainty space.
So I do have a new study, and it's not fully peer reviewed, so full disclaimer, but we're pretty excited about it. And what we find is that increasing use of crop insurance over time leads to more machinery investment.
No kidding.
Yep. And and it actually changes like household labor allocation. So I'll put that in like real terms. So what we see is the operator is working more on farm. So it's like helps with labor specialization basically. And it's creating wealth. I mean, some of it from the farm, but also from that off farm income. And I think there's a lot. We are, as economists, like especially we evaluate policy, we critique. A lot of the research in crop insurance, it's looking at moral hazard, it's looking at expenditure, as it should. But if you have this, if you have this real improvement in risk management, like presumably there's a benefit.
Yeah.
And perhaps some efficiency gains from that. And I think there's some good research that says they don't think people are using more chemicals or, inputs or anything. I think maybe what, like in this study, we found, this is something farms have been able to do. They've been able to make more investments and specialize more. And, and labor shortages are the name of the game right now.
Right. Well, and they've been the name of the game for a long time, right? So the challenge, okay, so crop insurance has been, I think, also kind of awkwardly stuck for a while because I think we are desperate for a new farm bill in terms of updating crop insurance structures because we're just kind of stuck with what we have. And there is that, like, I think the polemic take that we have seen our last farm bill. How do you feel about that statement?
Do you mean that
we'll never have another farm bill? We're just going to have what we have and we're just going to keep going.
I mean, it's partially to be determined. But there was a lot of money put into the farm commodity programs.
Yeah.
And crop insurance increase in premium subsidies, especially for these supplemental or high coverage policies. And so absolute strengthening of the farm safety net. The cost of that was the food safety net. So are you going to have this compromise or are you going to have a series of extensions and occasional reconciliation bills where you can at least increase the spending for whatever your party prefers?
Right. Well,
I don't know the answer to that.
It's hard to guess, right? Like it's all speculation at this point. But one thing that I do think it really highlights is this kind of non-traditional place that we're in, right? Like we don't. This is not your grandma's farm bill anymore, right? Like all of this farm policy looks different from what it did 10 years ago. Yeah. And the process with which we get it, I think, opens up a lot of conversation around non-traditional anything. And you've done a lot of work on non-traditional finance specifically.
Yes.
So let's talk about non-traditional finance.
Let's do.
What does that even mean?
Well, the word non-traditional itself is a little loaded.
Totally.
Because, we're looking, you could say non-bank finance. So the way that I like to look at what's your majority lenders to production, who's providing most of the credit? It's a farm credit lender or a bank. So I like to use the term to characterize the sort of what's outside of the majority. And it's growing a lot. But you can put
in terms of share, it's not that big, right? The growth is big, but the share of non-traditional.
We don't know what the share is.
Okay, tell me more.
I mean, it's, it could be 25% or a third, but we don't know because, so some of them like life insurers, they report lending volumes. They're not a bank. So, you could argue over where you put them, but they're being publicly reported. But a lot of these private lenders aren't required to publicly report loan volumes. So those, the debt that they're holding, that gets into our estimates of debt through survey data. Which is not, and I've done some research on this, it's probably not capturing all of it. So, I think it's double what we think it is.
Wow.
And the numbers I've been hearing about input finance say that maybe, double to triple, maybe it's closer to triple, especially on the production loan side. And so.
Does that make you nervous? Is this different? Is this that much different from what we've had in the past?
Well, again, we don't know.
Yeah, sure.
I could usually find a quote from Mike Bolgi about non-traditional supplier finance playing a role in what happened in the 80s. We don't have great data. Maybe we do. Maybe I need to become a historian and figure it out.
I'll tell you, we spent a full day just throwing away Mike Bolgi boxes in the basement here a couple weeks ago. And maybe that was where all of the non-traditional finance data was. I just gave it all away. It's gone.
But I mean, I think think about it in terms of financial contagion. So vendor finance is normal. A lot of private finance, people have always gotten loans from a relative. It's normal. If things are normal, then it's normal. It's all good. There's sort of two things to be concerned about. One is this idea of, amplification. If things go wrong, and this is what policymakers, if things go wrong, how wrong would they go? And the more that you have this sort of informal credit or sort of, credit that's being provided outside of the financial sector, there's a potential for amplification. So and on top of that, we know it's grown a lot over the past several decades. In some cases, but not all, it's being used when there's more stress. And you got to be careful, but there's plenty of evidence of that.
Can you give me an example? Like what? Like when?
So we did an in-depth study in New York State in the Northeast. So that's where you can have a high degree of confidence. So we looked at credit being provided by feed mills, feed manufacturers, and milk prices. And so we got Chad, your colleague, he did a lot of the work for his master's thesis. But we were able to go back to 93 and look at on the farm side, farms, their accounts payable were going way up when milk prices were increasing, and then they were going back down. So we could see that. And then you could also see we got the feed industry to give us data from 14 to 18, and we saw how their accounts receivable were going up. And this was 75% of the industry by value. So we documented it, like completely what was happening. And again, it was like getting the data, but like we knew the stories. So we were, and the stories aren't always right. So we were, putting that together. At the same time, the farm credits in the banks weren't showing an increase in stress and delinquencies and other things. So it was people that couldn't get more operating credit who were going to, their feed mills. And some of them were going out of business because of it, like there was. And so, that's what you're worried about. And if it, and this happened for a while and it kind of worked. But if you'd had another shock on top of that,
yeah,
you're having this, it's like, and we were saying the feed manufacturers jointly were the largest bank. So they would have been smaller than Farm Credit, but larger than any bank in terms of what they were holding. And what they're holding is technically delinquent. So
right,
that's the,
wild card.
It's where things have the potential to go wrong.
Yeah.
Or where, that you're worried about amplification.
So what is driving the shift at this point? So like if we have this shift toward non-normal.
There's not just one factor. So, I mean, there's a couple.
Yeah.
So one is you have new capital, and you probably see this in the, it's a way to invest in agriculture.
Yeah, sure.
Through lending. Convenience, you have a lot of innovation on that. Convenience is a big factor on the vendor finance side. So that's a huge part of the story. There's increased tightening regulation of farm credit lenders and banks. So, that's happened. So it's really the combination. And a lot of these non-traditional lenders have gotten very good at what they do. So that, and that's fair. It's a part of their business strategy. And so, all these things have led to the growth of this, this non-traditional finance.
I don't know enough about this, but is it true that this non-traditional lending structure is not terribly uncommon outside of the United States? Like my understanding is Brazil, for example, like there's a lot more of this that happens there.
It's a huge part of the global economy. There's a whole, it's tracked globally. Yeah.
Right. So it's not,
absolutely.
I mean, so what we're doing here, like it's not like this is a crazy unique U.S. problem, or not even a problem, crazy unique U.S. phenomenon.
And there's a Federal Reserve report that looks at private lending and I think, maybe if I keep continuing to work on this, if there's support to work on this, maybe I need to go sit with some of those folks and think about that.
Well, from what you've done already, like I'm convinced that there's more work that needs to be done here. Like it's not clear to me that we have all the answers. I mean, from what you've even talked about, we wouldn't have all the data, let alone all the answers.
No.
And so I can't decide if like this is a distress signal or if this is just something that's a shift in business behavior.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we dug into the Kansas data, so it's hard to get data, farm level data. We have the Kansas farm, good Kansas farm data, and so we were able to look at the lending composition of farms, and it looked like there's a story also of this is a growth-oriented farm. They're taking on more debt, but they're also more profitable. So there is a story, if you want to grow a farm business, adding on lenders is a way to do this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, at least options, right? Like, because I wonder about that, right? Like we've seen consolidation not only on the farm side, we've seen it in the ag input side. We've also seen it in the lender side. Right. So, I mean, these farm credits themselves have consolidated pretty rapidly. in the United States over the last 30 years. So maybe this is just like adding more competition into the marketplace. What do you think about that?
I think that's a part of the story. So one of the things we saw with the Kansas data is when you had more banks in an area, agricultural banks or not, any measure of more banks in a county, that farms were less likely to have multiple lenders, which I was like, at first we're like, what? Because we're like, oh, if you have like a lot of banks, then you can actually like make them compete and go get more
Yeah, sure.
loans.
Sure.
But what we think is happening is that this is actually this like, the bank, it's a community bank. It's about that relationship. So banks are located and stay where they can sort of have this, stable relationship with a producer. So I think that could be part of the story. We see fewer banks and big branches over time.
I don't know. Like ag finance is one of those topics that like, I think every single ag econ department in the country has tried to hire like a good ag finance person, but it's so hard to find like somebody that understands the ag side and understands the finance side. Like it's, you kind of only get one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I came at it from a non-traditional route.
Right.
And I've never worked in lending, but like, again, in the land grant system, we have access to lenders and we have partners, and that's how you do it.
So my last prepped question is that if you're talking to a room of agribusiness executives, what's the one thing about farm financial conditions right now that they probably don't fully appreciate? And what does history tell us about what happened when that thing gets ignored?
I could think of a lot of things, but I must stay in my lane.
No, go for it.
So I think, we talked about debt repayment, and farms have been adding a lot of debt right now. And so, part of the pressure with sort of tight profit margins for farms is loan repayment. And, seen it in Kansas and other places. If you look at the USDA data and you measure it right, you could see that most farm income today goes to repaying your loans. And I think that's, that does, drive a lot of this sort of push for additional payments, ad hoc payments. So, yes, land values are high, solvency isn't an issue, but there's a lot of debt out there. We're kind of on the border for whether or not farm income can serve this. Now, farms have lots of tools, lenders have lots of tools they can use, but that's the starting point.
That's good. So what in history though, like what is this? I mean, it's not the 80s, but like this repayment structure, like what is this, like what we've seen in the past or not really?
I mean, we saw a low repayment capacity going into the 80s and it got worse, but you had the high interest rates on top of it. So it lowers the capacity to absorb additional shocks.
Right. Okay, so yes, but I wonder on this, like I just want to keep talking about the 80s for some reason, but like I think you probably lost a lot of inefficient farmers in the 80s, like the ones that really did not have their kind of management strategies tied in or really didn't understand farm finance. And so now in this like hyper consolidated world that we now live in, like how many of these people are operating in a place where they don't understand? They're overconfident about touching the oven, right? Like they think they're fine, but that overconfidence might lead them into a challenge here.
I mean,
does that make sense?
Yeah, and I see like consultants or some research, you kind of, you put farmers into buckets of how they manage, what their goals are. I think you don't just have one bucket. Like you still have the different buckets. The inefficient farms are a smaller part of it.
Yeah.
For sure. I think what's interesting, 2027, like what's going to happen to farm. I mean, we'll really know in about maybe 2 or 3 years what happened between 22 and 27.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, we've been hearing, if you're mostly tenant farmers part-time, that people have been either getting out that were close to retirement or showing interest in it. So that's been a theme for a couple of years now.
But back to the international aspect, like, I mean, in the number I always throw out is that the average age of the farmer in Brazil is actually decreasing. So for as much as we talk about the like increasing farmer age in the US, it's the exact opposite in Brazil. And so like, I wonder about this like structural shift in global competitiveness and what that does to this efficiency of farm strategy and financial management.
Yeah. Well, the average age of a farmer is actually the general population. Matches the general population in the U.S. That's what I understand. Maybe in Brazil, it's the same thing. I don't quite know where Brazil is at. I mean, there is it's always like, oh, if we don't have more young people in agriculture, who's going to farm?
Yeah, sure.
Someone's going to farm.
That's right.
I think people care about who farms, though. That's why
Yeah.
we're having that discussion.
I think that's fair, but I wonder, like, this conversation also tends to mislead in terms of who makes the decisions on the farm, right? So even if
Yeah.
the farmer themselves is old, that doesn't mean that the farm manager is, right? So I
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
especially the larger farms, you're going to have a farm manager, and that farm
Yep.
manager
Yep.
probably isn't going to be the actual like official farmer. It's the person who does make all the decisions.
I mean, you're going to have someone that works on risk management. You're going to have an agronomist. You're going to have
Yeah.
a team.
So yeah, I don't know.
Maybe we could have a support group sometime for people who follow big name
Who what?
ag econ professors.
Who follow, yeah. Right. I mean, I think the world of ag econ is such a fascinating place.
Oh my goodness.
But I wonder, I mean, like, this whole podcast is about how 50 something years ago, 1981, there's this book, Agribusiness Management, that gets published. And it's the first time anybody ever publishes a book on this topic. Yes, Ray Goldberg came up with the word in 1951, I think.
Yeah.
With some colleagues at Harvard. But like, that really wasn't the development of a field. It was just more of a statement of fact that the agribusiness looks different, and that the supply chain of agriculture and food is not just the farmer.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So that's interesting, right? But from 1981 to now, we've seen this growth into a discipline that is now the third largest major in colleges of agriculture, which is fascinating, right? Like, the top two are really veterinarian focused, so animal science, and then I think like vet med or whatever. Those are the top.
Fair amount of animal scientists go into agribusiness.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I would imagine a lot of them that do that wish they'd have taken more agribusiness classes, right? So I mean, I find this interesting, right? That like, while we have this growth on the undergraduate side, we oftentimes struggle to find faculty who are qualified to teach those classes. And so props to you for being one of the few folks out there that I think are really doing a great job. And I think that your Fleshpaw Center stuff is awesome. So I'm happy to help however I can, because you guys are kind of my go-to people for a lot of ag policy stuff right now. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. Please join again on your preferred podcast platform as we dig into the policies driving food and agriculture today and in the future.